This is my crew now, yes or no?
This thing doesn't work, it's our ass.
I understand it now. There's an exhilaration to the risk.
That rush cost me everything.
President of my company can't be averse to the very thing that built it.
What are you saying?
Tommy Norris was never supposed to still be standing. Every number, every projection, every corporate model said he should have been gone by now. M-Tex had the capital. They had the infrastructure. They had teams of analysts whose only job was to find the most efficient path to total control of the Permian Basin. And by every measurable standard, that path ran straight through Tommy Norris. The smart money was on the corporation. The logical outcome was consolidation. Independent operators like Tommy were supposed to be a chapter that was already closing. A generation of roughnecks and dealmakers who belonged to a different era of the oil business. What the models did not account for was the man himself. What the spreadsheets could not calculate was what Tommy actually knew, who he actually trusted, and how long he had been preparing for exactly this kind of war without anyone realizing it. Season 3 of Landman is not a story about a man who gets lucky. It is a story about a man who understood the fight before the fight even started. And by the time M-Tex figured out what was actually happening, Tommy had already changed the terms of the entire war. The first thing Tommy Norris does in Season 3 is nothing. And that is exactly the point. While M-Tex is moving aggressively across the Permian Basin, acquiring land, restructuring operations, and signaling to every independent operator that resistance is futile, Tommy watches. He does not panic. He does not make a desperate countermove that burns resources he cannot afford to lose. He studies. He pays attention to how M-Tex structures their acquisitions, how they communicate with the people they absorb, how their decision-making flows from the top down, and how long it actually takes for their instructions to reach the field. This is not passivity. This is one of the most deliberate strategic choices Tommy makes all season, because what he learns during this period of observation becomes the foundation for everything that follows. M-Tex is a machine built for scale. Their strength comes from standardization. They move into a market, apply a proven operational template, and extract efficiency through consolidation. It is a model that has worked in other basins, in other regions, in other industries. On paper, it should work here too. But Tommy understands something about the Permian Basin that no corporate model fully captures. This land is not a controlled environment. It never has been. The basin has its own logic, its own rhythms, its own network of relationships that have been built over decades by people who never had the luxury of working from a distance. M-Tex is importing a system designed for predictability into a place that has always rewarded adaptability. Tommy sees that gap immediately. He does not announce it. He files it away and waits for the right moment to press on it. What makes this phase of the season so compelling is how the show frames Tommy's patience as a form of intelligence rather than hesitation. There is a version of this story where Tommy responds to M-Tex the way most people would expect, aggressively, emotionally, from a place of pride and territorial instinct. That version ends with Tommy losing everything. The Tommy Norris of Season 3 is not operating from ego. He is operating from clarity. He has done the math, and he knows that a direct confrontation on M-Tex's terms is a fight he cannot win. They have more money, more lawyers, more institutional backing, and more political cover than he could ever assemble. If the battle is fought on their terrain, using their rules, with their resources setting the standard, Tommy is already defeated before the first move is made. So he refuses to fight that battle. Instead, he begins asking a different set of questions. Not how do I stop M-Tex, but where does their system break down? Not how do I match their capital, but what do they not know that I do? Not how do I protect what I have, but how do I make myself essential to an outcome they cannot achieve without me? These questions lead Tommy toward a strategic posture that M-Tex never fully anticipates. Because the corporation is so confident in its own model that it never seriously considers the possibility that someone operating with far fewer resources could find the cracks in their foundation and quietly begin to work them open. The season establishes early that Tommy's greatest competitive advantage is not anything he owns. It is everything he knows. He has spent years in the Permian Basin building a kind of knowledge that cannot be transferred through an acquisition or replicated through a database. He knows which leases carry hidden complications that only reveal themselves under certain conditions. He knows which wells require constant human judgment rather than automated management. He knows the seasonal patterns that affect road access, the logistical pressure points that slow down large operations, and the names of every local contractor who actually keeps things running when the systems fail. M-Tex has information. Tommy has understanding. And in a place as complex and unforgiving as the Permian Basin, those two things are not the same at all. That difference becomes the engine of everything that follows in Season 3. Once Tommy finishes studying M-Tex, he begins to move. But the way he moves is what separates him from every other independent operator trying to survive corporate consolidation in the Permian Basin. He does not file lawsuits. He does not go to the press. He does not organize a public campaign against expansion or try to rally political opposition in a way that draws attention back to himself. Every move Tommy makes in this phase of the season is quiet, precise, and designed to be almost invisible to anyone who is not paying extremely close attention. M-Tex has hundreds of people watching their competition. None of them are built to detect the kind of pressure Tommy begins applying, because it does not look like pressure at all. It looks like ordinary friction. The kind of thing that happens in a complex operational environment all the time. And that is exactly the point. Tommy begins by identifying the specific points in M-Tex's operation where their size makes them slower rather than faster. This is a counterintuitive idea that the show takes seriously. Most people assume that a larger company is automatically more capable, more resources, more personnel, more technology. But scale creates its own vulnerabilities. A corporation the size of M-Tex cannot make small decisions quickly. Every adjustment has to travel through layers of management before it reaches the field. Every deviation from the standard operating template has to be approved by people who are not physically present and do not fully understand the local conditions they are being asked to account for. Tommy knows this because he has watched how their communication flows. He has seen how long it takes for a field-level problem to get a response from the people who actually have the authority to solve it, and he begins placing pressure precisely in those gaps. The disruptions Tommy creates are never dramatic. The show is deliberate about this. A delivery arrives late because a particular road cannot handle the weight of heavy transport equipment after a period of heavy rainfall. A drilling schedule gets pushed back because local crews are not comfortable operating under a new safety protocol that was designed by people who have never worked in this specific region. Equipment downtime extends beyond what M-Tex projected because no one in their planning department accounted for the maintenance realities that every regional contractor already understood. Each of these incidents, taken alone, looks like bad luck or ordinary operational variance. M-Tex's internal reports probably categorize them exactly that way. But Tommy is not creating bad luck. He is creating a pattern. And patterns, unlike individual incidents, have consequences. What the show captures so effectively in this section of the season is the compounding nature of small disruptions. M-Tex's operational model is built on the assumption that their projections are roughly accurate. They set timelines, allocate resources, and make commitments to investors and partners based on those projections. When the projections start slipping, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but consistently and in ways that are difficult to diagnose, the consequences spread outward through the entire organization. Budgets get strained, timelines get revised. The people responsible for delivering results start spending more of their energy managing explanations rather than managing operations. And at every level of the corporation, confidence in the model begins to erode in ways that are slow and quiet and very difficult to reverse. Tommy never claims responsibility for any of it. That is an essential part of the strategy. The moment he becomes the visible cause of M-Tex's problems, he gives them a target. And a corporation with their resources can do enormous damage to a single visible target. So he remains in the background, continuing to operate, continuing to build relationships, continuing to present himself publicly as a man who is simply trying to survive in a changing industry. Meanwhile, the operational friction he has introduced into M-Tex's system keeps accumulating. They are spending more than they planned. They are delivering less than they promised. And they still do not fully understand why. That confusion is not accidental. Tommy built it deliberately, and it is about to become the foundation for the next phase of his strategy, which is not about disruption at all. It is about construction. While M-Tex is burning energy trying to diagnose problems they cannot trace back to their source, Tommy is quietly building something they will not be able to buy, replicate, or dismantle, no matter how much capital they deploy against it. The human network. The thing M-Tex never saw coming. The thing that ultimately changes everything about how this war is fought and who is positioned to win it. Tommy Norris has spent his entire career understanding that the oil business is not really about oil. It is about people. It is about who trusts who shows up when things go wrong, and who has earned the right to ask for something difficult and actually receive it. M-Tex understands transactions. Tommy understands relationships. And in the Permian Basin, where conditions are unpredictable and the margin between a successful operation and a failed one often comes down to a single decision made by a single person in the field at the right moment, that difference is not abstract. It is everything. There is a moment in Season 3 where the true nature of Tommy's strategy becomes undeniable. It does not happen in a boardroom. It does not happen in a legal filing or a public statement or a dramatic confrontation between two men who represent opposing visions of the oil business. It happens quietly, in the kind of ordinary setting that the show uses repeatedly to signal that something important is taking place beneath the surface. Tommy sits down with someone who had already sold out to M-Tex, someone who had taken their offer, signed their paperwork, and believed that their time as an independent operator was finished. And Tommy does not offer them money. He does not promise them a better deal or a bigger number. He offers them something that M-Tex structurally cannot provide. He offers them a seat at the table, not as an employee, not as a contracted resource to be deployed and managed from a distance, but as a participant, as someone whose knowledge and presence and judgment still matter in the outcome of something real. That conversation changes everything. And Tommy has versions of that same conversation with dozens of people across the basin throughout this stretch of the season. What Tommy is building during this period is not a business coalition in the traditional sense. It is something more organic and more durable than that. M-Tex has been moving through the Permian Basin, making acquisitions and absorbing independent operators. And in doing so, they have created an enormous population of people who understand the land, understand the work, and feel completely alienated from the corporation that now technically controls their livelihood. These are field supervisors who spent 20 years learning exactly how a particular section of the basin behaves under pressure. These are landowners who have watched their families work the same ground for generations, and who signed corporate agreements not because they wanted to, but because they believed they had no other choice. These are local contractors and logistics operators and equipment specialists who built their businesses around relationships with independent operators, and who now find themselves treated as interchangeable vendors by a company that does not know their names. Tommy finds these people, he listens to them, and then he gives them a reason to stay connected to something that still reflects how they understand the work. The cooperative agreements Tommy builds during this section of the season are structurally simple, but strategically profound. He is not asking people to take on significant financial risk. He is not asking them to openly oppose M-Tex or to violate agreements they have already signed. He is asking them to maintain parallel relationships, to keep communication open, to share information about conditions on the ground in ways that keep Tommy's network informed and responsive in real time. In exchange, he offers them a degree of influence over decisions that affect their land, their crews, and their operations. Influence that M-Tex has never offered and never will, because influence requires decentralization, and decentralization is fundamentally incompatible with the corporate model M-Tex is built on. Tommy is not just building alliances. He is building a distributed intelligence network that covers the entire basin and operates on trust rather than contract. The show frames the contrast between what M-Tex offers and what Tommy offers with remarkable clarity. M-Tex offers employment, stable income, corporate benefits, defined roles, and the security that comes with being absorbed into a large institution. For some people in the basin, that offer is genuinely attractive. Certainty has value, especially in an industry as volatile as oil. But M-Tex cannot offer belonging. They cannot offer the feeling that your specific knowledge of a specific piece of ground actually shapes the decisions being made about it. They cannot offer the experience of being known by the people you work alongside, rather than managed by people who will never visit the location they are responsible for overseeing. Tommy offers all of that, and as the season progresses, the show makes clear that for a significant portion of the people operating in the Permian Basin, belonging is not a soft or sentimental consideration. It is a practical one. People perform differently when they feel ownership over an outcome. They make better decisions, they respond faster when something goes wrong, they stay longer and work harder and bring more of their actual capability to bear on problems that require genuine judgment rather than procedural compliance. This is the deepest strategic insight Tommy carries into Season 3. M-Tex is trying to win a human industry by removing the human element from it. They are replacing relationships with systems, replacing judgment with protocols, and replacing accountability to specific people and specific places with accountability to metrics and timelines set by people who will never stand on the ground they are managing. And while that approach produces efficiency in the short term, it creates fragility over time. Because systems fail, protocols cannot account for every variable. And when things go wrong in the Permian Basin, which they always do eventually, the difference between a manageable setback and a catastrophic one almost always comes down to whether the right person with the right knowledge was present and trusted enough to act without waiting for approval from someone 3 levels above them in an organizational chart. Tommy's network has that capacity. M-Tex's operation increasingly does not. And as the operational strain that Tommy has been quietly engineering begins to accelerate, that difference stops being theoretical. It becomes visible in real time, in real conditions, in situations where M-Tex's centralized structure is simply too slow and too distant to respond the way the basin demands. The corporation begins to realize, gradually and with growing unease, that they are operating in a landscape that is more organized against them than they understood. They cannot identify the architecture of what Tommy has built because it does not look like an organization. It looks like a community. And communities, unlike corporations, cannot be acquired. They can only be earned. Tommy spent years earning this one. M-Tex never had a plan for that. And now, with the season moving into its most consequential stretch, that absence is about to cost them in ways their projections never accounted for, and their analysts never saw coming. There is a particular kind of confidence that comes with scale. M-Tex carries it into every room, every negotiation, every acquisition meeting in Season 3. It is the confidence of an organization that has never encountered a problem it could not solve by deploying more resources at it. When timelines slip, they add personnel. When local resistance slows an acquisition, they increase the offer. When operational complications emerge in the field, they send specialists. This approach has worked for them consistently across multiple markets and multiple years. It is not arrogance exactly. It is a rational response to a track record of success built on the assumption that every problem in the oil business is ultimately a resource problem. Throw enough capital, enough technology, enough institutional weight at any obstacle, and it eventually gives way. M-Tex enters the Permian Basin carrying that assumption like armor. Tommy Norris spends the middle portion of Season 3 systematically dismantling it. The key to understanding how Tommy does this is understanding what M-Tex's speed actually costs them. The corporation moves fast because it has to. Their investors expect growth. Their internal projections demand constant expansion. Their competitive position in the broader energy market depends on demonstrating momentum. Slowing down is not an option that exists inside their operational model. Every quarter needs to show progress. Every report needs to demonstrate that the Permian Basin acquisition is delivering on the promise that justified the original investment. This pressure to maintain velocity is presented publicly as a strength. M-Tex talks about it constantly. Their messaging emphasizes decisiveness, momentum, and the ability to move at a pace that smaller operators simply cannot match. What they never acknowledge, because acknowledging it would undermine the entire narrative, is that speed at this scale requires making decisions before all the relevant information is available. And in the Permian Basin, missing information is never a minor inconvenience. It is how operations fail. Tommy understands this dynamic with a precision that is almost clinical. He has watched corporations move through oil country before. He has seen how their timelines create blind spots, how their need for quarterly results forces decisions that people with more patience and more local knowledge would never make, and how those decisions create downstream complications that take months to fully surface. He does not try to prevent M-Tex from making these decisions. He positions himself just ahead of them. When M-Tex prepares to move on a piece of infrastructure that their projections have identified as strategically critical, Tommy has already spent weeks quietly deepening his relationships with the local suppliers that infrastructure depends on. Not by offering them more money than M-Tex can match, by offering them reliability, communication, and the kind of direct accountability that comes from dealing with a single person who answers his own phone rather than a procurement department that processes requests through a ticketing system. By the time M-Tex arrives to secure those supplier relationships, they find that the landscape has already shifted in ways their advanced research did not detect.